This week marks 1 year since the election, 1 year since ACT's 5 new MPs stood in this very parliament for the first time, and what a year it has been. ACT has consistently punched above its weight, driving change within the coalition government. Many of the policies we've seen implemented have come from ACT ministers. The latest inflation figures released on Wednesday reflect how effective those policies have been. When we entered government, inflation was at 5.6%, squeezing household budgets and hurting everyday Kiwis. Through decisive action, cutting wasteful spending and focusing on efficiency, we've brought inflation down to 2.2%, back within target. The cost of living crisis is being addressed step by step, with ACT leading the charge. We've also spoken up against race-based policies which have no place in modern New Zealand. This week, our leader David Seymour denounced the Solicitor General's guidelines that ask prosecutors to consider a person's race in their decisions. This stands in direct contradiction to the need not race approach ACT and the coalition government have championed. We've received assurances that this issue is being dealt with at the highest levels.
I'm actually surprised that there's not more people asking about these prosecution guidelines. They're totally inconsistent with the values of a civilised country where everyone is equal before the law. They're totally inconsistent with this government's commitment to need not race, which is part of coalition commitments. We've raised it with Judith Collins, who says she's all over it, and we look forward to her acting on what seems to be a pretty egregious breach of the foundational principles of this country.
Closer to home, we continue to hold local government accountable. Over the weekend, my colleague Cam blasted Wellington City Council for its wasteful spending. Our council should be focusing on core services, not frivolous projects that drive up rates and offer little benefit to ratepayers. Todd Stevenson also slammed the lavish spending of the Film Commission, $145,000 spent on a 2-week trip to Cairns, fine dining, bottles of wine. It's a blowout that's completely out of touch with the financial reality many New Zealanders face. These are the kinds of expenses we must cut to create a leaner, more responsible government. Meanwhile, Nicole McKee has announced plans to reform burdensome anti-money laundering regulations that have strangled our businesses with unnecessary red tape. Time and resources that should be spent on innovation and growth are instead wasted on compliance. ACT is committed to freeing our businesses to do what they do best, create jobs, lift productivity, and contribute to a thriving economy. We're also pushing back on overreach in the education sector. Dr. Parmjeet Palmer has challenged the Council of Legal Education's plans to mandate compulsory tikanga Māori courses for all law students. While we respect the value of cultural understanding, we cannot support unnecessary mandates that undermine academic freedom. Parmjeet also spoke in the House about Auckland University's plans to impose compulsory treaty courses for all students from next year.
Mr. Speaker, this is going to create a lot of suffering for students because at the end of the day, students are going to suffer, and in the long run, our country is going to suffer.
As for health, Todd Stevenson has called out the absurd suggestion from the National Public Health Service that councils should pressure food trucks into selling healthier options. The priority should be on infrastructure, not telling hard-working Kiwis what they can eat. We've seen ACT's coalition commitment for tougher benefit sanctions working, with more people moving off benefits and into work compared to a year ago. This is a result of clear, effective policies that make clear welfare is a hand up, not a handout. Mark spoke in Parliament about freshwater changes to reduce regulatory burden on farmers. As a farmer, Mark was able to talk the practical realities of life on the farm and teach the opposition a thing or two.
And some of the hyperbolic statements from said member Steve Abel just now insert a sort of rationale, you might say, Mr. Speaker, that we're hell-bent on destroying the environment. What an absolute nonsense. We live in the environment.
Finally, our focus on attracting overseas investment is beginning to bear fruit. David Seymour recently announced reforms to our overseas investment laws, bringing them in line with global best practices. This will ensure New Zealand is competitive again, attracting the capital needed to grow our economy and lift wages. In every area, from local councils to the national stage, ACT is delivering on its promises. We are here to make government work better, cost less, and do more for New Zealanders. Together, we're driving real, meaningful change, and we're just getting started.